Mic check. Thank you for your patience. For those that are joining us online, we are having some technical difficulties with our video, so please hang tight and we'll get started in about 5 minutes.
afternoon. My apologies, or our apologies for this late start. We've experienced some technical difficulties, but we're ready to go. So, call to order and roll call. All members are present. And so, with that said, would you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, that's great. All right. Pursuant to council and administrative policy, meeting rules and procedures, section 5.2, comments by members of the public are genuinely limited to 5 minutes or less if a large number of speakers is anticipated, or if approved by the chair. Speakers desiring answers to questions should direct them to the Planning Commission, and, if relevant, they may direct them to the appropriate staff members. Speakers can also follow up directly with staff during regular city business hours. Please file a speaker's card with the administrative secretary on the form provided on the counter at the back of chambers. During this portion of the meeting, those present in the council chamber are permitted to speak on items that are listed under items not on the agenda during this portion of the meeting. Public comments are scheduled agenda items and should wait until that time. Zoom participants during the general public comment period will not be accepted. And please note that the commission's actions are final unless an appeal is filed with the city clerk within 10 calendar days.
Through the chair, I have one speaker card, Danny Dorman.
Okay.
Good evening. Dr. Roberts,
Hi.
looking forward to having you on the council in 2025.
Well, thank you.
Yes. Even if it's write-in, doggone it, I'm putting it on the record. I hope you have submitted the proper papers. And to Commissioners Spalding and Johnson, if not Steve Kerr, then who?
Uh-oh.
Hey, I'm listening. I'd love to know myself. Now, regarding conditional use, which I believe is a future agenda item, so I won't really go into it specifically, but I think it's an open secret that there are those in the city that try to bend everything to the to accommodate developers, whether it's Popeyes, the soon-to-be-built structure on Balfour and Brentwood Boulevard with the whole percentages of parking that decide whether or not what's going to move in to a slot there or not, or that monstrosity of an apartment complex that's going to go up on O'Hara. There's a trend that I hope my ranting and raving will get attention. It's no secret that the majority of planning and community staff don't live here. And if I were, and I have been, a planning manager, a general contractor, architect, what have you, I know that if I wasn't living in the city that I affect with a recommendation, it really wouldn't bother me too much. It would be like, hey, well, I'm just doing my job or whatever. So I'm being selfish. I live here. And to be honest, I really have no skin in the game because where I live, everything that has been approved or going forward doesn't affect me personally, but it does affect Brentwood. And these questionable decisions are to present to you, or worse, when it just goes straight to the council without any input from the commission, is just wrong. And to be honest, I really am trying not to call out people. I'm really not, but it's the usual people that have their fingerprints on stuff. And I'm really disappointed when the city attorney debates whether it's you or the council on the legality of things. And again, it always seems to go towards the developer. And, the city attorney staff, are always supposed to look out in the best interest of Brentwood. And sometimes that best interest is not rubber stamping a complex. There's nothing wrong. And you guys are far better than the council, but maybe a little bit more pushback is required from you guys. You guys are the keeper of the gates. The council really is the referee that calls kickballs. So, gotta call him as you see him. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
At this time, I have no other speaker cards in person for public comment.
Okay, very good. Thank you. With that said, I'd like to go into the consent calendar. Vice Chair Spaulding was absent from this meeting. If he wishes to vote on the consent calendar, he should first make a statement that he has had the opportunity to review the video.
I have.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, with that said, I'm looking for a motion. Do I have a motion?
I make a motion to adopt the consent calendar.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. We're going to go into the business items now, public hearing. Public hearing. So
I had a brilliant PowerPoint to share, but it looks like we won't be able to do that tonight, so I will just give you a verbal. Okay, so this is an annual item that gets presented to the Planning Commission. It's in accordance with state law, which basically requires the commission to review the city's capital improvement program for conformance to the city's general plan. The capital improvement program itself is basically shepherded through the process by our finance department, but with input from every other department in the city. And it's structured as a rolling 5-year plan of major improvements, infrastructure, and different kinds of projects as a result of anticipated growth throughout the city. So the current draft is for the next fiscal year, which the city calls 2024/25 through fiscal year 2028-2029. The general plan and the capital improvement program are tied together in many ways, including, for example, construction of roadway improvements that are needed to support build out of the city. There's 3 primary purposes of the CIP. One is to integrate capital improvements with other activities, such as implementation of the general plan. Number 2, to ensure that planning for capital improvements is tied to realistic and predictable ways to finance them. And then 3, to define desired improvements and anticipated construction schedules. The CIP itself is an effective tool for the design and construction of major capital improvements necessary to accommodate anticipated growth. It's also developed to further the goals and the objectives of the general plan, and therefore is internally consistent. The 7 categories of improvements that are organized into the CIP are roadways, parks and trails, water, wastewater, community facilities, future improvements, and those are improvements that aren't currently funded, and then development. And those are projects that are either funded or constructed through a specific private project, like a developer project. Each project sheet in the CIP includes applicable general plan policy or policy references for the Commission's reference. And as a result, each project is connected in some way to the general plan. Finally, a determination of consistency is exempt from the California, exempt from California Environmental Quality Act review, so there's no need to do anything special there. And last but not least, this is not a public hearing, so no public notice was provided. At this time, the recommendation from staff is to adopt the attached draft resolution, finding that the capital improvement program is in conformance to the general plan. We'll then forward the Commission's recommendation on to the City Council at the end of the month, at which time the Council will discuss the priorities, phasing, and cost estimates for each project. And if the Council approves the CIP, it will take effect at the beginning of the next fiscal year, which starts on July 1st. With that, I'll turn it back to the Chair for any comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, does the Commission have any clarifying questions for staff? Commissioner Johnson?
Not at this time.
Commissioner Spaulding? Commissioner Floyd?
Yes, thank you, Chair Roberts. I just have a couple questions that are sort of tangential. I know that the CIP includes all of the items that were selected for funding. And so if a person was interested in seeing the things that didn't make the cut, I think they would need to go back and look at the last City Council meeting where that was discussed. Just for the benefit of the public, because I think this is a really fascinating topic and people like to know where their money is being spent. And anybody that hasn't seen the CIP that's in the public should definitely take a look at it. It's right here in the agenda for this meeting, and especially all the individual project pages are really informative and show you what's going on. I did have a question about a number that was showing up as, for the previously funded projects for the vineyards at Trilogy. There's a number there, and it's like, I think it's $5 million and something. And I think we received that money back in, maybe 10, 12 years ago. I don't even know. And it seems like that dollar figure doesn't change from year to year. Do we accumulate interest on these amounts, or is that something more for accounting?
I appreciate the question, but I won't even be able to hazard a guess as to how that works. If you're really interested in it, I could follow up with city staff after the meeting and get back to you on that.
Yeah, I have a real curiosity about that. Okay, and other than that, though, what we see on the CIP is just what's funded, and as far as the analysis that's done against the general plan to make sure that it's conformant. I didn't really see any analysis in here where it was looking for things that maybe it didn't conform to, or that we might want to have a concern about. It all seemed to be pretty positive. Did you go through the general plan and see if there was anything where it wasn't conformant, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So none of these projects conflict with the general plan at all. And the box at the top right of each project sheet at the bottom when it lists the general plan policies. And for example, I just pulled up on page 71 of the CIP, which is the water and wastewater rehabilitation project. It lists a series of infrastructure policies from the general plan's infrastructure element that it's consistent with. But I can tell you that there's no project in here that is in conflict with or inconsistent with the general plan in any way. Otherwise, we wouldn't have it in the CIP.
And finally, did we make certain that no projects were left out that the general plan might require? So that if the general plan needs a project, then it should be in here, right? Nothing gets left out that the general plan requires.
Yeah, and I don't want to speak for the finance staff that's, again, responsible for shepherding us through the process, but I can tell you that it's a collaborative process with all the other departments in the city. So I would like to say yes, everything's been included that needs to be included. I think the other thing I wanted to say, which I mentioned to Chairperson Roberts earlier, is that keep in mind this is, I use the term rolling in the sense that when it gets adopted by the council, it sets into motion this 5-year plan based on all these different project sheets. The same thing is going to happen next year at this time, where the commission is asked to make that determination of conformance, and then the council is going to be asked to adopt that updated plan for the next 5 years. And in the course of the intervening year, things change. So certain projects may get completed, so the next time around, they will be removed from the CIP. Sometimes the budgets get updated, the priorities shifts. So it gets evaluated every year, and then even in the intervening periods, staff is constantly looking at these projects and these sheets to make sure they're updated.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. Those are my questions, and I thank you for your patience.
Yeah, no
Appreciate it.
problem. Thank you.
Commissioner Brand?
I think I'll just save it for discussion.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to commend staff on putting a comprehensive plan together here to present to the Planning Commission. It's quite comprehensive. It's done very well. And so for that, I thank you. We can move on into public comments, and then there's some things I'd like to say during the discussion. So with that said, let's move into public comments.
At this time, we have one speaker card, Danny Dorman.
I wasn't prepared for this one, so I apologize for the freestyling. I read the opus. Is it comprehensive? Yes. But there are questions, and I believe I'm referring to last year, where everything was approved, and yet projects all of a sudden came in that should have been in last year's CIP. So I don't know why this happened. I hope when you discuss it amongst yourselves that that question is raised, because if this is approved and next year, this time next year, all of a sudden we have yet another monstrosity that just happened to pop up, it would be nice to say, well, wait a minute, why wasn't it in this current plan? So, thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, I have no other speaker cards in person and no hands raised in Zoom.
Thank you, Ms. April. And at this time, I will ask for a vote to close public comment.
Through the chair, there's no need to vote. This is a public comment, not a public hearing.
Oh, that's so, pardon me. Pardon me. At this time, we can have a discussion? And so I will start with Commissioner Floyd.
Thank you, Chair Roberts. I don't really see anything in this that's going to give me any cause to question it. The only comment that I would make is just that it seems like the process doesn't, by the time the report gets to the Planning Commission, we don't see all the, some of the other considerations that are made. And from my questioning of the planning manager, I think you guys kind of get where I'm going from. We don't see any of the emissions that were made or the reasoning why, or why some things are better than other. We can follow the city council meetings, but so the report format I find is really excellent, but could be improved. But other than that, I don't really have anything to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Brand.
I only saw one thing in here that I think, based on what I read in the staff report, was that we're looking to sort of agree that this plan is congruent with the general plan. Oh, the CIP is congruent with the general plan. Now, I read through basically all of these, and the one that stood out to me was the Lone Tree Way improvements. It's listed under level 1D, mandatory. And in looking at all the touch points of the general plan, I see that there's some that it seemed to be omitted. And this is my interpretation based off of how I read it. You know, if you go to, oh gosh, which page is it? Sorry, just a moment. Basically, it calls out a number of, you know, CIR 1-2, IF 1-1, IF 2-1, and these are all the touch points within the general plan, right? A lot of these are related, you know, CIR, it's all related to circulation, so on and so forth. So ones that I thought that would be applicable as well include CIR 2-6, which stipulates to prioritize bicycle and pedestrian safety for students traveling to and from school. Part of this plan is to widen Lone Tree to include for not only sidewalks, but also bike lanes. At this time, there's a one-way each way, effectively from O'Hara all the way to Tilton Lane, as it's described in here. They don't have that. In addition, we list out policy CIR 2-7, which supports regional efforts to develop safe routes to schools safe routes to school programs for schools that serve Brentwood's population. Now, this is an organization that attempts to more broadly impact the transportation to alternative methods of transportation for kids to and from school. And my understanding, at least at this time, is that the Isaac Montanez School does not have any real means of children getting to that school without a car. There's my back of the napkin math tells me that approximately 25 to 30% of students have access via pedestrian or bicycle at this time, and the school is going to open, I believe, on July 29th of this year. So I'll bring it back. Essentially what this, if you look at the position that it is within the general plan, the CIP as of right now, it's listed as 1D mandatory. But based off of those additional tags within the general plan, I would recommend that it get lifted to safety based off of those additions. Now, I need to bring that forward, but I would love to add to discussion, or I'd also look to council as far as the applicability to the general plan, and then how our purview directs us to sort of make a recommendation to city council.
Thank you, Commissioner Brand. So in looking at the resolution that you all have before you tonight, it makes specific findings on your behalf regarding projects that are consistent with the general plan that are in the CIP. And if you would like staff to add a line to that resolution, so the council is aware that you believe that additional general plan goals, policies, or actions are likewise implemented by some of these projects, if you have the support of your colleagues, staff could add a line in that regard so the council was aware of your collective findings.
Great, thank you. That is the bulk of my discussion. I think you could argue that LU 2-9 encourage future schools to be located in areas throughout the community in proximity to the neighborhoods they're close intended to serve, kind of serve circulation as well. But mostly those two I'd like to propose as being addendums to the CIP as a recommendation to council.
Okay, thank you. Very good. Commissioner Johnson?
I don't have any specific issues. Well, there's only one thing that I wanted to ask. The Los Vaqueros water treatment. I understand that's not in Brentwood, and I guess we're bringing water in. It's a joint deal with the county, Contra Costa County. And I see where it says that it's how, I just wanted to understand better how that interacts with the general plan.
What page is that on?
Los Vaqueros, hold on.
I'm probably not going to have a great answer, but I would like to look at the sheet.
On page, I think it starts at 98. 90, yeah, I think it starts at 98. Water storage capacity at Los Vaqueros Reservoir.
Okay, and I just have the CIP itself open as an attachment, so it looks
So
like
that
it's page
page
88.
would be 88?
Yeah. And your question was how it relates to the general plan, or?
Well, because I guess since it's not in Brentwood, I'm just trying to understand. It's just a clarifying question. So I understand you know, I read it, you know, trying to share water and use, but how does that relate to the general plan of Brentwood since it's in Contra Costa County and it's, how's that work? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really speak to the specifics of the project, but since it is identified as a CIP project, we basically identified what policies it's consistent with.
Okay.
As far as the general plan, and it's all infrastructure related. And I believe this is an ongoing project that's been in the CIP for prior years.
Okay. Not that I have a thing against.
If I may, through the chair, just real quick, and to add on to Mr. Notinius's comments, this particular project, though not located within city limits, is essential to such things as water supply and water capacity. So you see the references to the infrastructure element of the general plan. So even though it's not technically within our borders, it still very much affects what our residents, businesses, and visitors have available to them. So we still look for a general plan consistency finding, as this is one of the capital improvement projects that's included for this 5-year plan.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Spaulding.
I don't really have anything to add. It's just that the only thing I'll say is that, you know, our role on this is fairly limited. And so I understand Commissioner Brand may want to add something, but I think that unless we find an error in this, this is one of those things that the state makes the city do. And if the state didn't make the city do, then we probably wouldn't be doing this, right? Because this is really, this is all about how we're going to allocate funding, which is not within our authority. That's a city council decision. So unless there's an egregious error, which I didn't see anything that, because even your concerns about adding stuff, right? It's still going to be addressed through once the project is completed, right? So we just need to keep that in mind in terms of questions, because this will be here next year, right? This is the 4th time I think I've done this, and it's the same. It's a process. So.
Okay. And with that said, um, and to your statement there, it won't hurt to put it in. So at that point in time, I mean, council will see that we understand that it's got to align with the general plan, but if there are some things that we'd like to bring to light to council's attention, I'm sure they would appreciate it. And certainly they can strike it, but I'm sure that they would appreciate it. I guess my ask is, and it's something that Commissioner Floyd had communicated, and I don't think that we'll get an answer because the folks that probably could answer are not here, but how one goes about what's selected new. We know that a lot of these are ongoing, and we talked about that. And so it's just an ongoing project, but there are some new projects that are put into the pot. And how does one go about making those selections? But I don't think that because it's all the departments that kind of chime in and bring forth their ask. It's like a budget call, except that this is a CIP call. And so I guess it's probably tethered to grant funds and which one is going to be used up the quickest, which is maybe how they actually make a selection. I don't know, but I'd be interested to hear what you've got to say about that, the new ones, and how that's selected.
Yeah, and I'm going to give you a very non-technical, non-expert answer because I'm generally not involved in preparing the CIP. Certainly in terms of making sure it's consistent with the general plan, yes, because that's kind of what we do as planners. But it's a very iterative and collaborative process amongst not only all the departments, although finance basically takes the lead, but also with the council. And I don't remember the date, Katie, you might. I know that staff holds a workshop with the council like in the springtime. So they did that maybe a month or so ago. And that's an opportunity for the council to review the CIP in draft form. And they can drill down on specific projects, whether it needs to be included in the next year's draft. They can ask budget questions, timing questions, all that stuff. So basically by the time we get to tonight's meeting, the final draft has been prepared. And then this is the last step in order for the council to make its decision to officially approve the CIP for it to go into effect. That's not to say that they might not make some additional changes at the May 28th meeting, but I think the expectation is that this is the final version of the CIP. So there's a lot of back and forth. I can also tell you that, there's a lot of work that obviously goes into preparing this document on an annual basis. And I'm being a little flip here, but it almost feels like as soon as it gets adopted, we start working on, okay, next year's CIP. So there's very little time to sort of celebrate having the CIP adopted because you're looking at it constantly throughout the year, getting ready for the next year because it comes up so quickly. Does that help answer the question? I know it's a little bit nebulous, but that's basically the process.
No, I get it. I understand that it's a process, and like an audit, you close an audit, and 2 months later, you're dealing with a letter of engagement, and you're in audit again. So it's similar. It's constantly in front of you. So I appreciate it. And I appreciate the work that council's done. To bring it to us, for us to take a look-see and then make our determination. So thank you. Any more discussion?
No, I'll just bring up what I know the city of San Mateo does for a specific type of funding. They actually have a standing committee that actually the departments have to go to and present plans for where they want priority money spent. And then it goes to council to approve that, right? So there's a different, so cities do it differently. Now, it's not necessarily their CIP, but it is another chunk of money, fairly significant amount of money. I have a friend who's on that committee. That's why I know what what happens with it. But so there's that's just gets to get more community engagement in this. But again, our role on this document tonight is very, very limited. And so that's really, I think, what we should be
Yeah.
focused on if there's enough people who support Commissioner Brand's position of adding some policies, that's certainly, what we can do. But beyond that, in terms of, obviously, we don't have any say in terms of, well, I don't think this project should be more important than that project.
Right.
That's not our role, right? That would never be our role. So I think we just, for this time around and then next year, for those that are on the planning commission next year, that's just something to keep in mind.
Okay. So with that said, could you go ahead and add what, I'm sorry? Yeah. Well, yeah.
April's going to try to share my screen. And while we're sort of working on the technical side of things, I'll tell you that we have, oh, here we go. Thank you so much. You're a wizard, April. So the first thing we're going to do is fix the spelling of resolution, just to make it right. And then as we scroll down, these are the findings that you're making, and Commissioner Brand's suggested finding. I don't know if I've quite captured it, so Commissioner, maybe you could, this kind of keeps it in the same style as the other ones, but is that what you were intending to communicate?
Also CIR. Also
Yeah.
CIR 2-7.
Mhm.
Does that look about right to you?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So if at some point someone's going to make a motion, you might just move to adopt a resolution, if you're supportive of this, with the amendments discussed.
Okay. And I think we're ready for that? Sure, of course.
Thank you.
Commissioner Brand.
I want to acknowledge the Parks and Rec Committee, department, because the selection of park rejuvenation was really, I mapped them all out, and it's a really nice spattering across the city. It's not all clumped in one part of the city. It's kind of, every district has at least one park that's getting rejuvenated, and some, I think, have needed it for a while. So I think that was a great observation as far as where to hit those first. So thank you.
Absolutely. Any more discussion? Okay. Well, I'll entertain.
I have something.
Oh, please.
I just wanted to read the state code just for a section in the government. It's GOV, Title 7, Division 1, Chapter 3, Article 1, Local Planning. And I'll just preface this by saying that the Planning Commission is optional under state code. There's nothing we do that the City Council can't do. But when there is a Planning Commission, we do have certain jobs. And it says here, each planning agency shall perform all of the following functions. I'm not going to read them all, but a couple. A, the first one, prepare, periodically review, and revise as necessary the general plan. So the general plan is really under our purview. And so C, annually review the capital improvement program of the city or county and the local public works projects of other local agencies for their consistency with the general plan pursuant to Article 7. And while I'm here, D, endeavor to promote public interest in, comment on, and understanding of the general plan and regulations relating to it. And I pursue D quite a bit. But tonight, what we're doing is item C. And I do take that seriously. It's a responsibility under state code. That was why I was interested in whether or not we could improve the process to make it more meaningful. And I support Commissioner Brandt in wanting to bring forward any advice that he can, because we're acting in an advisory role tonight, and we owe it to the City Council and to the public and to the state of California to take our role seriously in this. Thank you.
Okay. Any more discussion? Hearing none. I look for a motion on this resolution, 24-020. May I have one?
Yeah. I make a motion to adopt Resolution 24-0-20, finding that the proposed 24 to 25 through 28 through 29 CIP is consistent with the general plan with the amendments listed, formally on the screen up here.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to the next business item, appointment of a member from the Planning Commission as advisory member to the Brentwood Municipal Code Review Committee. And we have a staff report by Mr. Nalthinis.
Can I just say it real quick for the benefit of everybody, just for the heck of it?
Sure.
Nalthenius.
Nalthenius.
There you go.
Got it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, here we go. This is a very brief presentation, no PowerPoint at all. It'll probably take me 60 seconds or less. At the City Council's last regular meeting, which was April 23rd, the council approved the creation of what's called the Brentwood Municipal Code Review Committee and requested the commission appoint one of its members as an advisory member. The scope of the committee is to review the municipal code and make recommendations to staff on updates that might be needed. It's anticipated that the committee will meet twice a year with one meeting in January, one meeting in July. And of course, there may be some special meetings scheduled as needed. At this point, the council has appointed Councilmember Orlemans and Councilmember Pearson to serve on the committee. And they're looking to meet on the second Wednesdays, again in January and July at 5:30. At this time, staff would request the commission discuss amongst itself who would like to participate. You could discuss, make a motion, nominate someone, second with a vote. I know that Katie was at that council meeting, so if there's more specific questions as to either the creation of or the scope of the committee, she might be able to better answer those than I would. But at this point, I'll turn it back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nalthenius.
You're very welcome.
At this time, does the commission have any clarifying questions for staff? The public comments? Let's clarifying questions first, I believe. Commissioner Spaulding.
Well, so this is an advisory position similar to LUD. So there's two, so the two council members would vote. And what happens if, I don't know if there's ever been a 1-1 tie. What happens if there's a 1-1 tie?
Well, in so much as I'm sorry, do you mind if I?
I don't mind at all. Thank you.
In so much as the subcommittee has been formed to make recommendations to the entire council about possible changes to the municipal code, then I imagine in the event of a disagreement between the two members of council, just both perspectives would be brought forward for the entire council's consideration.
So in like a tie here, if we only have 4, and wouldn't necessarily move forward at all, they would still move forward.
So when we have a tie here, you're actually taking action. When the committee has a tie, it's on items that are going to go to the council, the full council anyway. So yeah, I would imagine they would still move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Johnson,
I have no questions.
Commissioner Floyd,
I have no question for staff. Thank you.
Commissioner Brandt,
No questions.
neither do I. With that said, I'll open it up for a public hearing.
Yeah, and it's just
Public
just
comment.
public comment on this one, correct?
Through the chair, we have one speaker card in person, Danny Dorman.
Again, freestyling on this. Whoever is appointed, even if it's an advisory capacity, I hope that you really dig in deep. I last week met with the assistant city manager because a small business run by a second-generation Brentwood resident was and is being harassed by somebody because of codes that really shouldn't even be on the books anymore. However, because they are on the books, the city's obligated to take a look at it. And I know there are others who are in similar circumstances. So your input, whoever you are, is going to be important, especially since, and this is with all due respect to the two council members, they are about a year and a half into their role as council people. So, and neither one of them really had a full understanding of how the city ran, and this is based upon what I witnessed during the debates and all that stuff. So it's not, and they both recognize that themselves. So with here, you folks know how the city operates. I understand you're just planning, but your input is really important. So whoever takes the role, well, I hate to say it, but I hope you take it seriously. Because if not Steve, then who?
Thank you, Mr. Dorman.
Through the chair, at this time, we have no other public comments cards in person, and we have no hands raised in Zoom.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, at this time, I will close public comment. Need a motion? No motion. Okay, very good. And open it up for discussion by the commissioners. Any discussion, Commissioner Floyd?
Sure. I was in attendance at the city council meeting, I think remotely, when Councilmember Pearson first suggested this committee. And I like the idea of it quite a lot. And I felt like the Planning Commission also has an interest in how the code is written. And so I suggested that they do allow a planning commissioner to sit on this committee as well. And I would like to hear from any planning commissioners that might have an interest in doing it, or before I would make any kind of a motion.
Thank you. Commissioner Brand?
Yeah, I mean, on that note, I would like to volunteer for this committee. We, as all of you do, we're in the municipal code quite a bit through most of our agenda items and such. And I'd like to have an opportunity to, augment, downgrade, add, or subtract accordingly based off of what seems most appropriate.
Thank you. Commissioner Johnson?
I too wouldn't mind going on this committee as I think it would be an excellent opportunity to broaden my horizons.
Very good. Commissioner Spaulding?
I'd be interested in participating as well, primarily because it's the only committee, I'm not on any committees, primarily because of the time of those meetings really make it difficult for me to be available. And since this is the one of the committees that meets in the evenings, that would actually work for my schedule, so.
Very good. And for myself, I'm not interested. I have more than enough on my plate. So at this time, I would like to look to council. What are the next steps here?
Y'all get to decide who's going to be on the committee.
Yeah, there you go.
Yep.
So, but just to clarify, so I think somebody should make a motion to nominate a representative, and then that should be seconded and then voted on, just to be as formal as possible, right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'd like to, if if it's okay at this point in time, I'd like to um, put up a motion for consideration, and having heard from the members who are interested, I would say that this in particular endeavor is going to be detailed. It's not for somebody who is wanting to learn. It's for somebody who wants to change. And it's not something that I would nominate somebody for because of a scheduling convenience. It's something where I would be interested in having somebody on there who's very detail oriented and resident focused. And with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and nominate Commissioner Brand.
I'll second.
Okay. All right, all in favor? So should we do roll call?
I don't think you need to do roll call.
Okay.
Try it without.
All right. So all in favor?
Aye.
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 No.
How many nays do I have?
No.
So just to clarify, I believe that was a 3-2 with Vice Chair Sparling and Commissioner Johnson, no.
Commissioner.
Did I capture that?
So you guys were nays?
Yeah.
And they're nays?
Okay.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. That concludes that item.
Oh, okay. Very good. All right. Let's move on to future agenda item request. So there's a future agenda item from Chairperson Roberts to discuss.
Through the chair, we skipped over G, informational reports from committees and upcoming meeting schedule.
Oh, pardon me. Oh, boy. All right, very good. I flipped the page too quick, sorry. Okay, so now we have informational reports from committees and upcoming meeting schedules. Transplant.
We have a meeting on, well, no, the meeting on Thursday got canceled, but the meeting, it's our last meeting.
Okay. Design review.
It,
Well, there have been no design review meetings.
Okay. And there've been no land use meetings either. Okay. And now we move into the request for future agenda items. And pardon me, I didn't mean to jump the gun, but future agenda item requests from Commissioner Johnson.
Through the chair, we should probably ask first each one if there's any new requests.
Okay.
Yep.
Are there any new requests? Commissioner Floyd? Commissioner Brand? Commissioner Spaulding? Commissioner Johnson? Hearing none?
Yep.
We'll move on now to the future agenda item. And Commissioner Johnson wants to discuss possible changes to the regulation for on-site public hearing signs. Commissioner Johnson, please explain your request.
yes, as driving around the city from time to time, I noticed planning commission signs that were notices to the public that were severely outdated. Some were from September of last year, some were from October of the year before. Also, there being wooden signs, I noticed a couple of them, one on, I think it's San Jose, where one of the posts have been broken. So you have signs that are falling down for public comment for things that have already expired. So my ask would be that we remove, after the public hearing has occurred, maybe there's a 30 or 60-day time frame in which the signs could be removed.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. At this time, the public is permitted to address the Planning Commission. Remarks are limited to 5 minutes.
Through the chair, I have no in-person speaker cards and no hands raised in Zoom.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion from the commissioners? Commissioner Floyd?
Sure. I do agree that the signs, once they've outlived their usefulness, should be removed just if for nothing else, for appearance sake and for cosmetic purposes. I'm not sure, we would have to ask staff, I suppose, if there's anything on the books about how long those signs can stay up. The one observation I've made several times when looking at these signs, you know, we go and do site visits quite often on these applications, and you look at the signs, and the font is pretty tiny if you don't actually stop the car, and a lot of times you have to kind of walk up to the sign just to read it, you know. So I think that the signs probably have a mandated format, but it's just a shame that some of the fonts, at least some of the heading fonts, couldn't be bigger. But that's not what we're discussing tonight. I think we're just talking about the removal, and I'm generally supportive of that.
Commissioner Brandt?
I'm just reading the attached form in the staff report. I just wanted to understand the breadth of the ask, because it sounds like, I mean, I agree wholeheartedly with what Commissioner Flora described. Because it also talks about all owners within 300 feet of the subject site are shown the least assessment rolls and such with regards to noticing. So now, was your ask only related to the physical signs, or is the scope wider to who is notified, or the scope of notification for local residents in the vicinity of that sign?
No, I was talking about the physical sign after a hearing has occurred, that the sign remains for years, I guess, based on some of the dates that I've seen after the hearing has occurred. So I'm just talking about the sign itself.
Understood. Yeah, it's unfortunate to see a sign degrade that quickly, particularly with heavy rains and such. And I think it is relatively appropriate to revise this in a manner in which the public is duly notified, but at the same time, we don't unnecessarily have a sign until we wait for presumably a developer or resident to get shovels in the ground to begin construction post-approval. Or denial, I guess, or, yeah, so.
Commissioner Spalding?
What's the standard now of how quickly a sign's supposed to be removed?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So through the chair, I wanted to clarify a couple of things, and I'm glad that the commission's able to have this discussion, because Commissioner Johnson brought this up a couple meetings ago. The way the code is written now, and it's been this way for quite a while, there's a set of criteria for these actual public hearing signs. And this is what was attached to this particular staff report. But item 4 reads that the applicant is responsible for maintaining the sign in a satisfactory condition, and then for adding a hearing date when that's been determined by the city. So in other words, we make sure that the sign goes up in order to deem the project application complete. We don't always know at that point when the hearing date is. So you might see some signs with the text, but then basically a blank spot for the date. They go back and add that when it's been determined. And then the last point, which is number 5, this is section C5, is that the sign is removed either at the start of construction or when approvals have expired. So, and I know that doesn't necessarily get to your point, Commissioner Johnson, but that's why those signs remain in place for so long. And they do serve as, I guess, a reminder in some sense that something is going on that particular property. I will say that if the commission is interested in making a change to the code, because that's not something staff can just do administratively, it would have to be forwarded to the council for consideration, and then ultimately they would make a change based on whatever recommendation the commission makes. I hope that makes sense in terms of the way we process these signs, though.
So I understand what you said. My question would be, once the commission has heard or made a decision on a particular project, my understanding and what I've seen is the project doesn't always go through. Even though we have maybe approved that project, it doesn't necessarily happen. And then, so then the sign is still there ad infinitum, or it could be denied here and the sign is still there. And I don't know what the enforcement mechanism is to make sure that the applicant who was either denied or approved continues to maintain the sign so it doesn't degrade there in the city. And it's not
Right.
just one sign. I mean, I've seen them all over the city.
Yeah. So to that extent, if there is a sign that is on a property and it shouldn't be there anymore, like let's say an application was withdrawn or it was denied or the approval expired and so there is no project anymore, then yes, those signs can and should be removed, and we would monitor those, or we need to start monitoring those better, I guess, is the point. If you have examples of signs that are still, in existence that shouldn't be, please let me know and we'll look into those. But again, that's the way the code is currently written, right? So if there is an approved project, that sign would remain until construction commences or the approval's expired. And that could take some time, obviously.
I'm not trying to take up the commission's
Oh,
time.
no, it's fine.
I'm really not. So I just would ask, what is once the sign is there originally to notify the public that there's going to be, a development in a particular piece of property so that they can come to the planning commission or come to the city council to, give their opinion about the project that's going forward. I'm trying to understand, once that has occurred, because that was the purpose of the sign, why do we need the sign until, the project commences?
Thank you for the question. As Mr. Nolthenius indicated, once a project has been approved, quite a bit of time may pass between approval and when construction actually starts. And in that interim, the point of this requirement is to notify the public that even though you don't see shovels in the ground, this project may be coming here. So if you're considering buying property next door, or if you want to know what traffic is going to be like in a few years, just keep in mind that this project may be here soon. So it's kind of an ongoing notice feature to the public so that things don't get approved and then just disappear from all sight. And then suddenly construction equipment shows up a year and a half later, and people are surprised by the fact. Leaving the sign up until construction starts or the project approvals expire continues to give our public notice that they may be seeing construction and development on that site.
So that makes very good sense to me. Now, I just have one more question then. How do we enforce maintenance of the sign? If that's the case, how do we enforce maintenance from the applicant? Or what mechanisms can we put in place that the city will enforce maintenance from the applicant during this period of time?
Yeah, I mean, it would start with planning staff contacting the applicant or property owner to have them fix the sign. If that didn't work, then we would certainly involve our community enrichment staff, and they could, send out a courtesy notice and ultimately a citation if they weren't complying. But that is part of the code, that they be maintained in satisfactory condition. I know there's been times that projects have been, deemed complete, getting ready for a planning commission meeting, and they've either been, vandalized or they've been damaged through, weather conditions. And we've noticed those and told the applicant to fix them, and they have. But I certainly understand the question there, and that would be the ultimate result, is involving community enrichment staff. We hope it doesn't come to that point, because we've established relationships with the applicants over time in terms of processing. So I don't really see that being an issue moving forward.
It's almost like the CUP question that's next.
That's right. It's coming.
A little bit.
So, and I appreciate Commissioner Johnson's ask, and I too would be troubled if there was a sign that was deteriorating in my neighborhood and had been there for some time, and the complaints have come in, or it's still sitting there deteriorating. I would have a problem with that. And so I'm not sure if there's time constraint on making sure that the applicant understands that not only are they about to build in that community, but they have an obligation to the neighbors in that community to keep things clean and neat, pleasant to the eyes. So I'm not sure if the code, and I doubt that it does, have a time for that applicant to, whether it's vandalized or not, people are vandalized all the time with their properties and they don't let it sit they attend to it almost immediately. So I'm just wondering, in the code, is there a time frame relative to the applicant fixing what's broken or deteriorating? And if it isn't, then how do we move on making sure that a time constraint is put in place?
Yeah, I mean, there's no timeline or time requirement in the sign chapter, but our community enrichment staff operates on a consistent basis in terms of when they send out courtesy notices, how much time people have to respond,
Okay.
and if they don't, then they receive a citation. So there's definitely incentive for them to respond and to correct the situation.
Okay. Commissioner Johnson? I don't see Commissioner Johnson's not satisfied. Go on, Commissioner Johnson.
Yeah, I just, I understand why the signs are there, but the maintenance of the signs, especially for a year or 2 years afterwards, or if the project falls through, even though it was approved and they decide not to build, do we have a process of taking the signs down?
We would contact the applicant / property owner to have the signs removed, and if they don't, then we would involve community enrichment staff.
Do we know how many signs are up right now all over the city?
I have no idea.
I'm just curious to
Several.
know what the scope is. I mean, I know what I see it, but maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree. I just don't know.
Well, what I would suggest, and again, I appreciate the question, the discussion. This is all good. If you have specific examples, if anybody has specific examples, whether it's a commissioner, it's a member of the public, please let us know if we've missed something in terms of a sign that either needs to be removed because that project doesn't exist anymore, or it's deteriorated to the point that it needs to be fixed. Let us know and we will look into it.
Thank you.
Sure.
I can sure enough take some pictures and send them to you. But the dates, and you'll get an email with a picture of at least one. But what I was going on is the date on the sign and the amount of sometimes years past the actual meeting date. So that was what I was using as a barometer.
Yeah, and I will say this, we don't see it quite as often anymore, but when projects get approved by the Planning Commission, there is a shelf life, right? The approvals don't last forever. So from time to time, applicants submit extension requests that then come to the commission for consideration. So at that point, if it's a project that requires a public hearing, that sign that was there initially would be modified to reflect the hearing for the extension. So it would sort of stay updated. And then if the project is built in accordance with the original time frame, that sign's going to come down anyways. So there really shouldn't be, I know you said there's a few out there, but there really shouldn't be any signs that have been up for years and years and years that need to come down. But again, please send those my way and we'll look into them right away.
Commissioner Spaulding?
Just trying to figure out a way to make Commissioner Johnson comfortable with the outcome because he doesn't look comfortable because it sounds like it's all in, what's being asked is, so what you're trying to get fixed is the signs that are no longer applicable still being up or damaged.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
That's the concern.
That's
right?
concern.
I mean, I understand the ask from the city, but I don't think should be on citizens. We have a community enrichment department. We know where these projects are. We know when we have community enrichment people who go around, and I'll go back to our most painful ruling of a shed that got reported that was outside of the bounds, right? And yet, where the gentleman had to tear down his RV shed, right? Because didn't have enough room. But yet we have a community enrichment department that just can't do this routinely. We know where these projects are. We know when they expire. we know when they've been pulled. So I think last week we got an email, the applicant for the the 2-home lot. So he's
Yeah, I saw that.
been pulled, right? So therefore there could be a sign up there. Like, why wouldn't we take care of that sign now? It's not, it should come down, right? So I think that's your concern,
That's
right?
exactly my concern.
So I don't know that we need to change any of this because this all made sense to me, but I think it's just we shouldn't have signs up that are no longer valid or no longer needed, and we should have signs that meet the standard that we lay out here. And I think the community enrichment, based on listening to what you're saying, the community enrichment department should be doing that as part of their routine role.
Yeah, it's in collaboration with planning staff because that's not something they normally really track. And just as a follow-up, you had mentioned that prior RV cover, that was based on a complaint. So
Correct. But what I heard being asked was, send me some pictures, right? And I think the planning staff knows where these projects are that have not been, they're not been built on yet, that have these long, like it shouldn't be that hard to get a list to go out and just make sure that all of them are in proper shape. I think that's the ask, right?
Exactly.
So I don't even know that this needs to be like that big of a deal. It just is create the list, go out and check, and then take whatever the appropriate action is. That's all you're asking,
That's
right?
all I'm asking.
fair enough. We will do that. But I just wanted to clarify that if that's really what Commissioner Johnson's looking for, then there's no need to recommend any specific language changes to the existing code.
That's true. The only thing I'd add to what Commissioner Sparling said is, I'm just saying it should be an ongoing process. What's the mechanism
Sure.
to happen, if you do it once a month or once every 2 months, but there should be a mechanism so it doesn't occur. So I don't want to send a whole bunch of people out there just one time and, Mr. Johnson, we got that taken care of. And then 6 months down the line, it's, somebody else's.
Sure.
And just one final thought, because I can see you're just about done here. So to the extent that you'd like to direct the use of staff time and resources, which this would be doing, right? That would typically be a recommendation that the Planning Commission would send to the City Council, because the City Council is the one that kind of has control of that. I hear Eric saying that maybe we can get together a list and look at these things, but just as a general matter, if the Planning Commission is going to ask for time and resources to be devoted, that's something we would elevate to the City Council.
I disagree. We're not asking for time and resources. These salaries are already paid for. And I think what you're asking for is enforcement of what we already have. Right? So basically, if someone is getting paid X dollars per year to do the planning role, and then obviously I know community enrichment has to do it, that's X dollars for planning for community enrichment, right? We're just asking for, I think you're asking, I don't want to speak for you. You're asking for just enforcement of what is already here. So that is not in my opinion, and I have this argument with finance in my company all the time, it's not additional money or time, it's just part of their job.
And I see what you're saying. I think what we heard earlier was that these are generally complaint-based responses that we see from community enrichment at this point. They're not making a list and proactively going out and monitoring each of those. They're responding to complaints because the volume of their calls are so enormous already. So to add an affirmative new obligation to that sort of work program, that's something that we would look for further direction on. So that's all I'm mentioning here.
Yeah, no, I understand, and we may agree to disagree, and that's okay. I do, all the time. I just think that this is already baked into the budget, right? This is part of what what we have to do is one time we have to get cleaned up, right? The way I think about this, right? I don't know how many there are. Maybe there's just the one that you always see. Right? There could be more. And then once we get cleaned up, if we just enforce the process that we already have here, we won't have an ongoing problem.
We got it.
Chair Roberts.
We'll take care of it.
Yes. Before we wrap this up, I have just a couple thoughts that I wanted to throw out there that might be helpful. I don't know. The first thought is, if somebody sees a sign, be they a resident or a business owner or anybody that they think shouldn't be there for any reason, or they don't like the condition of it, or anything else, and not knowing anything about the planning department, they could just whip out their phone with Connect 24/7 and take a picture of that thing and make a submission. And I'm sure that community enrichment, when they receive that, would pass that on to planning. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So there is a mechanism through community enrichment, even if it's not a community enrichment problem, it can be reported through community enrichment. And I would hope that most residents are informed that they can report graffiti, garbage, anything, and this is just anything kind of thing that they could report, and it will be managed by community enrichment. So I think we have that. Not to put it on the public, but just saying if the public sees something and they don't know if that sign belongs there or not, they can just report it and they can get some kind of a response from the city. Item 2 for me is on the sign, they go back and they add the hearing date. So there's like a place for it, and they can just go back and put the hearing date on the sign. Could we not also have a notification on the sign, if there's room on there, I don't know about the format or anything, that just has a notification of the date when the sign will be taken down? It could say something like, this sign will be removed when construction begins or on or after this date, which would be the date of the approval expiration. Would something like that be doable so that if a person was curious about a sign and was standing there reading it, they would know how long that sign would be there? That would require, I think, a motion, but.
Yes, I suppose it's possible. I mean, the code basically says, and it's a little bit generic, but it basically says, hey, describe the project that's being considered, include the appropriate number to call for questions, and it needs to be readable. So it's a little subjective. Staff developed kind of a template for how these should read over the years, and I think generally they're pretty effective. Every one of them is a little bit different depending on what the actual project is. Is that something that could be added almost like as a tagline at the bottom of the sign? I think so. You also have to balance the sign being like too cluttered too with too much stuff. But if that's something the commission is interested in doing, we can start telling applicants that that's something we want added to the signs. And I don't think a change to the code is needed for that.
So it would just be a change to the template.
Yeah.
And we could ask you to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And the third idea would maybe something you're already doing. It's something that I always do to remember things in the future, is I just set a calendar reminder. So at the time of the approval, you know the expiration date. And I don't know if you have a calendar or if you have a list of procedures that you follow when an application expires already, but there should be some way that you can just get a reminder at the time that sign should come down, and maybe give them a couple of weeks. I don't know if they have grace after that or whatever, but somebody could just, as I'm sure you have other processes that you follow when an application expires, and just add that as a step, is just to have somebody take a swing by there. It could even be community enrichment doing their rounds, just somebody to make sure the sign is gone. Would that be something that would be doable?
And I would definitely, as the planning manager, I would definitely prefer to lead with planning staff and the specific project planners that are involved, because we're more in tune with it than community enrichment staff. So I'm not trying to put this on that staff per se. And I know there's a lot of people that use that 24/7 or the Connect app. That's totally fine. But I would also encourage people to reach out to planning staff directly, whether that's myself or any other project planners. We deal with residents and business owners and customers all day, every day. And so this would just be something that gets added to that list, which is totally fine. We encourage that.
And going back to that second item, the notification of takedown, could add a contact. Just the general phone number for planning or planning at brentwoodca.gov.
You're saying, could we add that? Could we add a contact number?
I'm sorry, what?
I think it's on.
It's already on there, yeah.
Okay, or just say, you know, contact the number above, or wherever that number is in relation to where this note is going to be.
Right.
Just so people know, and that way they, if they wanted to call community enrichment, they could, but at least they would know who to call. So just some kind of a note like that, just on the sign. And do we need a motion for that? Or is that something that you can just manage?
I'd like to get consensus from the rest of the commission about, you know, what sort of changes you want to the sort of the template. I don't think you need a motion for that, but just maybe some head nods would be great.
Okay. Is that?
Commissioner Spaulding?
Yeah, I would say that I understand where you're going with the expiration date and on that, but since requests can be made to extend, it becomes unsustainable. I mean, right now we're talking about an issue that should already be done. I don't think it's appropriate to ask the citizens to report when signs should be taken down or in bad shape. This should be a process that the city takes care of, because it's graffiti. I know you use the example of graffiti, and it's a good example, right? Except that graffiti is unexpected. The signs being in good condition is expected by the applicant. And so I think the maintenance of the sign really should be something that is done proactively by, you know, planning, you know, community enforcement, what have you, because I think we're doing the citizens a disservice if we ask them to report everything. Yes, they can use 24/7. That all can be done. But I think what the original ask was to enforce the process that is already being built. And the ask is, or the observation is that it's not being enforced. We have a process and it's not being enforced. That's why I don't think this needs to go to city council. This just needs to be enforced. And it hasn't, from what you've witnessed, you believe it has not been enforced.
Well, certainly, but I see no harm in putting a notification on the sign, so if a citizen is curious why it's still there, they would see why it was still there. It's not laying anything on the public to be responsible for anything. They can report it if they want. But I think anytime that we can give the public a little bit more information, so if somebody sees a sign, it's been there for a year and they're wondering, why don't they come take down that sign? If they just go read it, they'll know why. And that's all I'm asking, is just a simple note on the bottom of the sign. It's not putting anything on the public other than just giving them a little bit more information.
And then there's an expiration date and the person applies for an extension, that's not updated. It goes on and on about the sign being, the sign being current.
They have to update the sign with the extension anyway. If they're not putting a new sign, they have to every time update that sign to say, okay, this is the new approval date. Do they not?
But the ask is just maintenance of the sign, right?
Correct.
Like I would love to talk about the 300 feet. It's not on our agenda tonight, right? So we have to, so the ask is to keep signs in
Good condition and remove them when appropriate. And that's the only,
And we will do that.
that's it.
Commissioner Brandt?
Yeah, follow-up question. Commissioner Johnson, do you see anything in here that would preclude enforcement, or you would need to add to enable enforcement to meet the standard that you've described here today? Because I'm hearing from your perspective is that it's not about like what's here. It's purely the enforcement of it, right?
Exactly.
We don't want to burden our citizens. The onus isn't on the residents. It's on the city to keep the upkeep, make sure that they look like, because I look at this and I think, well, what is satisfactory, right? Do we have a minimum standard, an objective standard to meet that? That might be a little bit much. Or do we make a recommendation to council to have a discussion about measures that they can take to up-level enforcement or something of that nature? I don't know.
I'm really just talking about a mechanism to follow up and follow through to make sure that, that's all I'm really talking about, the mechanism that removes signs when they're supposed to come down and enforces maintenance of the sign. And that may be when people are driving around, but I'm assuming just like we did, Commissioner Sparling mentioned the guy who had the 2 homes that came before us, I think it was either 2 weeks ago or whatever, right? So because he's removing his application, what is the process to make sure that that sign comes down? Because he removed his application, it's not going to be extended. What is the process to make sure the sign comes down, and
The
how do?
turnaround time.
And that's all I'm asking.
Another good example, I think, in Silver Lake Apartments, that took, I think, last check was like 8 to 9 years to build from the time it was approved. And they go 2 years and then they put a pipe in the ground or something. They go another 2, like, just to keep it going. And so presumably, we're still looking at a dirt field, but there's small things to do to carry the project on. That would still, I don't know, in that case, would you keep the sign up? Because presumably it looks identical to the way that it did when it was first approved. I don't know what would warrant us to take the next step to indicate to this, to the residents that enough momentum is made on the project. I don't know. I don't want to derail here, but yeah.
Were there any other follow-up questions or concerns? I don't know if there was consensus about the
Yeah,
additional
I
language.
didn't hear from the other commissioners other than Sparling on the idea of putting a notification on the sign. I know that Commissioner Sparling seems to object to it, but I haven't heard from the other commissioners whether they think it's a good idea or not.
What was the specific wording that you were looking for?
Well, I wasn't giving wording. It would just be a notification that the sign would be taken down either when construction starts or by this date, which would actually be the date of the application expiration, and would let people know that if the sign was up after that date, who they could notify if they wanted to.
I mean, if it's a simple template, I don't have any ridiculous objections. That seems simple enough.
So it sounds like there's two things going on here. It sounds like, and I want to keep with Commissioner Johnson's ask, which is remove the sign when it's supposed to be removed, whether it is an expired application, an application that has been denied, and/or when maintenance is required. That's the ask. And what I'm hearing is, well, in the interim, which I have no problem with, let's give the public information about the applicant. There's two different things going on here. The one thing that I want to say is, and I think the public often who comes forward and speaks to these departments about their due diligence and their need to follow through on, i.e. the enforcement of some of these items, to which I'll be getting to in a minute here myself, is the enforcement and where that is. I think that in order for the commission to move forward on this ask, we have to have a date certain or something in writing that speaks to what the status is or when the status has been given and how soon thereafter will those signs come down. I don't think the public needs to be involved, although giving information to the public I'm okay with that. But at the end of the day, the sign has to come down once it's determined that the applicant has to take full responsibility along with enforcement in making sure that these things follow. So I'm hearing two things, and I want to stick with the ask, and the ask is take the signs down accordingly. That's what I believe, that's the direction in which we need to be thinking on this. And if information is needed, I don't have a problem with information being posted, but the objective is to get the sign removed. Is that about right, Commissioner Johnson?
Yeah, like you said, I'm just kind of restating what you said. Once there's a denial and it's not going to go, or the applicant, rescinds his application, I just don't know what that process is after that. And I don't know the process of maintenance, what the department does to make sure that throughout the city, the signs are well maintained. Do they do it as they're going, is there a process? And that's what I'm asking. And so, to your point,
Okay. Commissioner Spalding?
So it's interesting because what's agendized here is actually different than yours is much smaller in scope than what's agendized here. Because what's agendized here is the entire language, which includes the 300 feet. So I'm not sure what we can and can't talk about, because when the original request, thinking back to the original request, which was, I think, 3 meetings ago, your request was specific to, I would like to see signs that are in disrepair or no longer needed to be taken down. Right? What's agendized is the entire segment, which would include changing the notification and the 300 feet. So what can we probably should have started here, but I think it just kind of hit me when I was sitting here thinking about what you wanted versus what was agendized, because I don't think they match. So Katie, you may have to weigh in here. What can we discuss, and what if changes to the council we recommend, what can we do? What's in scope?
Okay. So first of all, I did my best to capture Commissioner Johnson's future agenda item request in terms of, the wording. It is specific to regulations for on-site public hearing signs, which is a certain segment of the public hearing regulations or process. What I attached to the staff report is the entirety of that section, of which the signs are a part. So to your point, Vice Chair Sparling, no, there is no discussion tonight. There should not be any discussion about whether the 300 feet should be expanded or not. It's specific to the on-site public hearing signs.
What about the language that goes on the format or language that goes on the signs?
I would say yes. But to the extent that, depending on what the commission does, I don't think it's going to necessitate an actual change to the code that would then need to be forwarded to the council. Does that make sense? Okay.
But I think for what Commissioner Johnson, at least what I heard, for item, I think it's in the page that we're sent, C5, the project applicant shall remove all signs at the start of the project construction or when project approvals have expired, whichever comes first. Are you requesting a deviation from that language? I'm not hearing it personally, but okay.
no, but there would be let me just say one thing. If we deny a project, like, for example, those 2 homes that we denied, then if there was a sign up, it should automatically come down because it's denied. It's not going to be extended. Nothing's going to happen. That language isn't written in that part, but it could be a process, the process that we follow internal in the city, in the department. This is the process we follow. I don't know that it needs to be here. That's what I'm asking.
All right, let me weigh in with this as well. So thank you. This is a great discussion, right? So thank you for clarifying the actual ask or request. I certainly understand it. I know there's slightly different perspectives amongst the commission in terms of, what these signs should say and whatnot. In terms of, the process, there isn't some sort of formal policy or process that staff has developed. It's fairly informal. I can tell you that we have had to contact applicants over time, not with every project, but over time, like, hey, your sign, blew down, or it was tore apart, or there's graffiti, and they have to fix it. It's never risen to the level, to my knowledge, of involving community enrichment. That's sort of a last resort. So my hope is always that we, as the planners, can work with the project applicant to fix the signs or to take them down when needed. It might take a little bit more time than people would like, but that's just kind of part of the process. So I'd like to continue doing that. I will also commit to conducting that inventory and getting up to speed on any signs that do need to come down, as of now. And then obviously moving forward, staying on top of that. And I can certainly report back to the commission if you're interested in terms of, hey, these 2 signs were removed from these locations, and either by way of email or follow up at the next meeting, something like that, if that's helpful.
That would be very helpful.
Okay.
I do, sorry.
Go
Chair
ahead,
Roberts.
Commissioner Floyd.
I do notice that C5 only mentions what happens when construction starts or when the approval expires. It doesn't mention the case that Commissioner Johnson mentioned where the application is denied. At what point in time then would the sign come down, and do we need to have language for that?
So while that section doesn't reference applications that have been denied, we've interpreted that in the past to be basically the same. It gets rolled into it basically. So that would be the start of project construction, an expiration, or a denial. But again, I don't think the code itself needs to be changed to reflect that.
You could say project approvals have expired or been denied, just 3 words, and would clarify it. I don't know that we have to do that, but maybe that's something that Commissioner Brand could consider in his new committee assignment.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a rarity. Again, I mean, to formalize that in a code amendment would again involve putting a recommendation forward to the council, coming back, having the commission recommend the language, and so I don't think it's necessary, just in my opinion. But if the commission feels strongly that the code needs to be amended to reflect certain things, obviously that's the commission's purview.
I think you're getting frustration at this end of the table. I think he just wants the signs taken down when they should be taken down, and if they're damaged, to be fixed. I think that's the goal. I think the language here is fine. We don't need a recommendation to council for anything. We just want, I shouldn't say we, well, you and I, right? Want just greater, because I know we're agreeing on rating body language. We just want the enforcement of the current situation to be done. It's here, it's just not, it sounds like there's a disconnect between what you believe is happening and what Commissioner Johnson is seeing. So, and that's fine. You're not going to see everything, right? So,
Absolutely.
and I think there just needs to, and we have a process, it just needs to be better driven, because it doesn't sound like it's driven as well as it could be.
That's fair. And again, I'm committing to take care of it.
Okay,
So,
that's good. Yeah, that's good. Are you good? I'm good. Okay.
I'm
very
good.
Good, very good. Okay, well, let's move on. Future agenda item, requests from Chairperson Roberts to discuss the conditional use permit process and specifically how conditions of approval are monitored and enforced. And I've had this, well, yeah, but I've got some language. So, the CUP has, as long as I've sat on this commission, has been a bone of contention, either with the public, with the commission, or both, and for a lot of good reasons. Because the CUP stays with the property regardless as to what happens in the future. And so we are often very careful, and we spend an awful lot of time with CUP. So not long ago, I asked planning department, I informed the planning department that some of the CUPs were probably not, well, it had been brought to my attention, not being enforced or not being followed, and what measure, if any, was in place for enforcement. And I got a response that, there's a lot of CUPs out there, and we just don't have the bandwidth, and I get that. So I did some research with some other municipalities here in the state of California, and I came up with this language or little information for the public, and that the implementation for conditions of approval are required to ensure that the proposed land use complies with the Plan Development Code, and that the resultant land use activity, assuming compliance with the condition of approval, is compatible with adjacent land uses. However, to be effective, the conditions of approval must be monitored and enforced. That's my ask. Compliance with the required conditions of approval is the responsibility of the applicant. The municipality, along with the DEQ, or the Environmental Quality, Department of Environmental Quality, et cetera, is responsible for monitoring and enforcement. In Brentwood, monitoring and enforcement are resident compliant driven by residents, businesses, the traveling public, other government entities, or others. Because Brentwood has acknowledged that it did not and does not have the resources to actively monitor or enforce conditions of approval. Identify areas of agreement on the status of compliance, monitoring, and enforcement. So I found this to be what a lot of the municipalities, both in the Southland and up north, are doing. The residents are actually, and I'm talking about operating CUPs. I'm not talking about building out building permits and things of that nature, grading. I'm talking about the actual operations of the CUP. And I know that we're a small community and we don't have the resources to go around for all the CUPs that have been put on many of these projects. So the residents are really the driving force here to report, or they have an opportunity to report and communicate out to the planning department before going to council or bringing it to us to say, you had a noise ordinance here, or you had or they're supposed to close at 12, they're closing at 1. But nonetheless, it is something that I want the public to understand. They are very much a part of the decisions that we make here as well, especially when it comes to enforcement. And so if indeed one of these CUP operational pieces is not being aligned or being adhered to, I'm really counting on the public, the city of Brentwood, to step up, take the opportunity, and make the phone call. Because that's why we have these conditions of approval. And just to have them and to say that this is the condition and not have any enforcement or monitoring, well, that's just not going to work out. Then we're enabling, and I don't want us to be an enabling body. So my ask, or it's not really an ask, it's more of letting the public know that I'm counting on them to step up and participate in this process along with the planning commissioners. And so with that said, I will open it up to the public. The public is prepared now to speak on this.
At this time, I have one speaker card in person, Danny Dorman.
Okay. With what you had just said, Chairwoman, this actually goes to what I wrote about the last one. I don't understand why it took 45 minutes to try to address what seems to be a simple ask. So, a community enrichment vehicle just sits and waits for a call. Going back to my small businessman who sees community enrichment on a regular basis, it's head shaking to see that there's pushback on Commissioner Johnson's ask. We're not San Francisco. Exactly how many hours would it take to cruise down a street, look up a sign, and cite if it's needed? I mean, who knows better than the city when a sign stays or goes? I, as a resident, will now be required to see if a sign should be there. which assumes that I have to look up the record to see if the sign should be removed and then submit a complaint. Or a person paid by the city who has access to all of this information can deal with it. This and the CUP are prime examples of what happens when staff doesn't live here. Okay, now, Commissioner Johnson, he lives here, so maybe he does see the sign on a greater basis than a community enrichment officer. However, to put the burden on the residents, for that matter, putting it on Commissioner Johnson or any of you to look and see, what the plight is. It's when you see overly grown grass on a field, that community enrichment drives right by, I would think, and sees it. So I don't know if it should wait for something like this for a member of the public to put in a complaint. As I said, we're not San Francisco. Exactly how many days would it take to drive around every block in Brentwood? I'm not even talking about the projects everybody knows about, just every block in Brentwood. Hey, this sign, should it be here or not? Again, using the example of the two houses that won't be going back or coming back here. Well, what if it did? What if they appealed it and went to the council? We see a sign. Oh, hey, you know what? First and foremost, we would have to know that the project was declined. All right, so presume it's a knucklehead like me who does know that a sign should come down. Now I have to call and see, hey, let's say I missed the last planning meeting. Hey, is this project still going on? No? Oh, well, tick-tock. Get rid of this thing. I don't understand why this is such a complex ask. I really don't. And with the CUP, the same thing. Commissioner Roberts, I understand, and believe me, I'll come up here and complain. However, who knows better when a CUP, most of the residents probably don't even know what that means. I barely know what it means, and I've been complaining for years. There's at some point in time, staff needs to do their job. I can't say it any other way. Staff needs to do their job. Yep, that's it.
Much.
At this time, I have no other speaker cards and no hands raised in Zoom.
Okay, thank you, Ms. April. At this time, I will close public comments and look to commission for any discussion. Commissioner Floyd?
Well, Chair Roberts, I don't want to hijack your
It's okay.
thing too much, but I want to echo out something that you said that makes a lot of sense to me. There are conditions to finish the project, to build the project, do the project, and then there are conditions of operation.
Mm-hmm.
And so given that these are kind of two different things, I think one idea that I have would be to separate these in the conditional use permit. I don't think in a design review there might be some conditions of approval, but those are usually not operational. They're all just buildings. So we're really talking about a business that has ongoing obligations under the conditions to operate, the hours we might put in, what sort of things they can have happening in their building, whether or not they can have music or not, things like that. So these are operational.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be my first thing for discussion is, can we discuss a possible format change to the conditions of approval so that conditions of operation are separated out into their own section. And there's a couple of things we could do if we have those operational conditions and we recognize that these are ongoing obligations on the business. And again, not on the owner, on the business. They stay with the business. One idea would be to require that businesses post their operating conditions at the business so that people, when they go in, if they think that there's something wrong, they can look and see. And again, by posting information or allowing people to make complaints, I'm not putting a burden on anybody. I'm giving them the opportunity to right a wrong that they see. And I don't think anybody objects to that. I think if somebody's breaking into your house, it's not the responsibility of the police to be driving by your house all the time to make sure it's not being broken into. If there's a sign that's all beat up at the end of the street and community enrichment doesn't notice it for a few days, go ahead and report it if you want. I mean, people want to be able to do that. People want to be able to report things. They want to know what's right and what's wrong, and they want to be able to do something about it. The city cannot address every possible operational violation, and I think I've heard from staff previously that a lot of times enforcement does come down to community notification of staff. So I think posting the operating conditions at the business would give the public a way to know what they can expect from that business, what business is, how that business is expected to operate, and they can say something if they want to, if it's not being operated that way. And again, I see no burden on the public. I only see the opportunity for the public to express something that they feel they need to express. Further, I would, so that's one idea. So that's two ideas. One is separate out the operating conditions, make them their own thing. Two, post the operating conditions at the business. And three, create a database of operating conditions for every business that is currently operating under a CUP. And that's an expensive thing, but it should be done. If you have a database that can be queried, you can then create a web page where a person can go and look up a business and find out what the operational characteristics are. Because right now, even the person operating the business that was conditionally approved 20, 30 years ago doesn't even know what their obligations are half the time. They have no way to know. And I've talked to staff about this before. Old CUPs, they're on microfiche somewhere. They're hard to look up. They're hard to find. And I'm not asking for every CUP to be posted as a PDF. I'm just asking that the operational conditions be pulled out and made available in some sort of a format. Could be any data format, could be JSON, could be XML, could be, I don't know, DB2. It could be any data format, but just in some way make that information available and then continue to accumulate it ongoing so that a business operating under a CUP knows what they need to do. Citizens, people, going to that business know what to expect there. It just seems reasonable. I just, the way it is now, and I understand that this third ask is a huge ask, but it just seems to me, and I've been giving a lot of thought to it for months now, that if we don't provide a way for the public to know, if we don't provide a way for the operator to know, then those conditions cease to exist. They just evaporate in a cloud of ignorance. So those are the ideas that I have. And again, sorry, Anita, if I
Oh, no, you're
kind of
fine.
went too far, but those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Commissioner Brand?
I appreciate the clarification as far as different aspects of the CUP, and I think it's apt to call out operationally specifically because that's how I also interpreted
That's right.
Chair Roberts' request here. I see this somewhat similarly to at least my professional life, is that we are here in the sense that we or will approve or deny a conditional use permit or make modifications accordingly. What happens beyond the point that it leaves us is we don't always know, right? And I think the discussion here is, uh, how do we ensure the adherence and such to what was originally provided or approved in that case? And so I see this as a a long-term field failure problem, because it's not something that we can address sometimes at the front end. However, what I will say is that, not to make another manufacturing analogy, but you it, you can't screen for quality. This is it's a thing of, we have to design for it, and I don't know how this type of concept theory would be applicable in the sense of the CUP. Like, how do we address this on the front end to more applicably give, do a couple of things, right? One is to pull that, once again, pull the onus off of the resident from having to report it or go through some type of exhaustive database that characterizes each business, maybe classifies them and some such. But also, provides a bit of protection to the business owner to say, like, yeah, you're within this range of, I don't know, depending on what the cup says, whether it's, hours of operation or some things of that nature. It would have to hold in that sort of duality between the resident and the business owner. So the bulk of my enthusiasm with regards to this would primarily focus on the front end versus some type of post, thinking proactively versus on the end. And, not to say that the most ideal solution would be exclusively front end, but I imagine there might be a small back end component as well.
I thank you for that. Commissioner Johnson?
So I have two questions, or maybe additions. If someone gets a CUP, let's say it's hours or sound, and somebody complains about it to the city, that, they're open past the hours that their understanding is they're open, what happens?
Well, planning staff is made aware of it, right? We investigate, we talk to the applicant, we meet with the applicant, ask them to correct the issue if it doesn't change. Ultimately, the item could be brought back to the commission for, a strong talking to the applicant, potential changes to conditions, ultimately even revocation of the use permit. That's not a process I'm aware that we've ever followed through to conclusion here in Brentwood, but that is a possibility. So they could, at some point, just lose their privileges. Can I just jump in with? Actually, I wanted you to finish your thought, because you had two questions, right, or two comments to make. But then I had some other ones as well.
So I just wanted to understand, one, the process. I guess you can tell I'm big on the process, what's going on or what's happening. What is the process when somebody complains, and what takes place within the city? I'm not talking about at the business, to enforce the CUP, A, or revoke the CUP. Is it like 3 strikes and you're out? Or is it you got 3 complaints, so, you got your 90 days on probation, I don't know what it is. You're on a process improvement plan. You're on a PIP. You're on a process improvement plan for the next. I don't know what your process is right now, but when someone notices that the CUP or believes the CUP is in violation, I just want to understand the process that's there to rectify. So maybe you're not out there policing every CUP out there, but when somebody does notify us, what happens next?
Yeah. Well, and like I said, so that's when the conversation starts with the applicant / business owner. There's a couple of examples over the years where it's gotten pretty bad, and even to the point of potentially coming to the commission. There was one business up on Lone Tree in a large commercial center, and it was constant. It was back and forth. The police department was involved, planning staff was involved, the business owner was involved. ABC was involved from the state perspective. And the city was about to bring it back to the commission because everybody had it. And the ABC license got pulled and the business closed. So that took some time. I'm just giving you that as kind of a brief example to tell you about how the process can work. There's no formal, written down, like you said, 3 strikes and you're out. There's none of that. So it's a collaborative process between the city and the business owner / applicant. And it depends on the severity of the nature of the complaint, but we definitely investigate those. We don't turn a blind eye to anything.
So to Commissioner Brand's suggestion about hitting it on the front end, I'm sure as everybody's here as an employee, you get an employee handbook and it outlines it. So when you get this, I'm using the CUP and an employee handbook as the word just went out of my head, but metaphor, thank you. When you get hired, there's all these rules that happen, and then you're told up front, hey, if you do this many times, you're going to get a verbal warning, then you're going to get a written warning, and then you're going to go to plant. It's all outlined. Do we have a process where when the CUP is awarded, here's the set of rules that go along with it? If we get a complaint from a citizen, this is what's going to happen. Is it outlined in the beginning so that the business owner is aware of what's going to happen when they're in violation? And that might help, just stating what the process is, and for maintaining your CUP would be a great benefit to the business owner and the community, I believe.
Yeah, and I was trying to pull up a recent CUP example. I think we have a standard condition that we include in there about making sure that all conditions are complied with, and if they're not, here's what happens. It's probably not as formal or as detailed as you're asking for, or as you're asking about, but maybe that's something that we can look into, post tonight, in terms of whenever the next use permit is brought back to the commission. Number one, how the conditions are formatted, right, from an operational perspective, and then what sort of additional details we might be able to include in there to give the commission some certainty.
Yeah, I just think something, it's a good thing to, as Commissioner Brand said, I'm really stealing, I don't want to take any, it's a good thing to outline the process beforehand and make people aware that this is what will happen if you don't adhere to the plan. And then from the city's standpoint, we have to adhere to the same things that we've communicated to the business applicant.
And just following up on Mr. Nolthenius, we found the standard condition, and it reads, if operation of this use results in conflicts pertaining to parking, noise, traffic, or other impacts, at the discretion of the Community Development Director, this conditional use permit may be referred to the Planning Commission for subsequent review at a public hearing. If necessary, the Commission may modify or add conditions to mitigate such impacts, or may revoke said conditional use permit bound upon applicable findings. And I will say I have been involved in some CUP revocations in other communities, and as Mr. Nolthenius indicated, there's no set formula for when that's the appropriate step, because it does depend on the severity of the transgression, the nature of the transgression. That is how they have failed to meet their requirements under the conditional use permit. So it's all very fact intensive, but each and every one of them does have, each and every CUP does have this standard condition that I just read and that Mr. Nolthenius mentioned.
So I'm not disagreeing with the language you just read, but in practice, right, so that's the issue, is what happens in practice, not necessarily the language. So you got to give them that, but you got to give them the language that you had. But in practice, do we have something that says if we get if we get 1 or 2 calls, I don't know what the number is, from concerned citizens, we do X. That's what I'm looking for, is the process behind maintaining what you wrote.
Yeah, and again, I think that's something that we can, discuss at the staff level. But to answer your question, no, there's nothing documented right now in terms of a process or a formula that gets followed. But I wanted to say a couple things. One is, just in relation to this item overall, I want to make sure the commission and the public knows this. And Commissioner Floor mentioned design review applications. It's a little bit different because those aren't operational in nature per se, but any project that the commission approves where conditions are attached, those are in fact monitored by staff. A lot of times they're broken down by different milestones. So if it's an actual construction project, there may be certain conditions that need to be complied with before any sort of permit is issued, whether that's a grading permit or a building permit. There are other conditions that are required to be complied with before any construction takes place, vertical construction. And then there's conditions that need to be complied with before occupancy takes place, so before the use basically starts operating or starts being used. Those are all monitored throughout by various staff members. So I don't want, because I've heard this condition issue come up several times, including by the public, and I think there's this perception that staff is ignoring certain conditions. That's not the case. The troublesome ones are, as Chairperson Roberts alluded to, these operational conditions for use permits. Because no, we are not out there at staff level monitoring every business or use that has an existing use permit, especially if they're after hours, right, to make sure they're complying. We do rely in large part on the public. If we do see something and it's clear, whether it's planning staff or community enrichment staff, we will take action, but in large part, we respond to complaints. I'm trying to think of a current example right now that we're dealing with where there is a use permit that's basically gone haywire, and I'm blanking on it. So if there's something going on right now that I'm not aware of, please somebody let me know. I also wanted to take this opportunity to remind the public, whether they're here in the audience or listening at home, they watch this video afterwards, please, if you have questions, concerns, anything about any project that's going on, whether it has to do with a notification sign, whether it has to do with a condition of approval, whether it has to do with a type of material that's being used, whether it has to do with a staff report that's being prepared, contact us. We're right here. We have direct phone lines. We have email addresses. We're here in the building. Come talk to us. We're happy to help, answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think that, sorry,
No,
through the chair.
I was going to acknowledge you. Go right ahead.
I think there's been a couple of recent things that I'll say the Planning Commission has done, right? I think the project that was a spec commercial suite, right? We changed the language that you read to that the Planning Commission must be notified versus at the discretion of the community director that was specific to that project. And that's something that we can do on every project moving forward if we want to, right? Because I think the challenge is, and by the way, we can pull, any of us, to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, Katie, we can pull any conditional use permit for review should we hear about it. Obviously, there's probably a better process than us pulling it for it, but we have it's within our bandwidth, and I've been watching and paying attention about city council and planning commission meetings for 8 years, certainly not the entirety of when Brentwood's been a city, but I don't remember a CUP being pulled for review at the planning commission or city council. No, so my assumption is that the problem ones have been taken care of at the staff level, which is where they should be taken care of for the most part, right? Unless something were to happen. And the specific reason why I think Chairman Roberts and I wanted the additional language of from at the discretion of the community director to must notify the planning commission is because the homes specifically behind that's commercial spec building. It wasn't like if it was surrounded by other commercial buildings, it wouldn't be an issue. It was really specific to that situation. So we can do that. The other one is the restaurant at Deer Ridge, right? Well, I couldn't participate in the conversation, and I still disagree with that FPPC ruling, but it is what it is. The updating of I think that wasn't as simple as the applicant thought it should be. I think it ended in a good place, but I think that's updating the CUPs that are complex, I think is important. I think that's something that is up to us to do what you did, right? You asked to have that reviewed, and I think you guys went through the process, and then you guys updated it, and it made much more sense after than it did had it just rolled forward with that example. I think to,
Commissioner?
yeah,
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but because we do have that FPPC determination, I would steer clear of that subject
Deer Ridge.
on Deer Ridge,
okay.
just for your protection. Yep.
Fine. It's the process, right? So it is I think that having businesses post the operational procedures, right, that would be theoretically approved here, I don't think is something that is going to make a difference one way or the other in practicality. So I think that's something to me that I don't think I could get support, because I think it's unrealistic to ask a business to do that. And I think most businesses would just end up not doing it. And then it'd be yet another enforcement issue that would have zero impact on the actual operation of it, because most of the operations of a business are going to be hours, noise, certain things that are going to get, be brought up. I think the difference between the previous conversation about the sign and this is that we know when a sign should not be there anymore. We don't necessarily know if a business is operating in the CUP. So that leads to my really only question for you, Eric, which is most of the CUPs I think that could be in conflict or have an issue are when the business there's the original CUP and then it changes to a different business, right? At that, and most of those don't come to us, right? If it's a restaurant and it changes to a restaurant, that may not even come to us, correct? And so that new owner may not know what does the city do to educate the owner on the original CUP that applies to the project, because someone like Mr. McCauley is going to know that because he knows how the process is, but most of the businesses in Brentwood are small business owners. They're not necessarily going to know the process. So what do we do to notify the new business owner of the CUP that actually governs the area or their new building?
Well, and again, there's no formal process for that, but to the extent that we know about a situation where that's occurred, we'll have a lot of times we get phone calls or emails from business owners asking questions like, "Hey, oh, did you know there's a CUP attached to this property?" We can email it to them, have a phone conversation, or they come into City Hall and we meet with them. I mean, it can take different forms, but to the extent we know about it, then we'll tell them.
So you could have a restaurant change hands and change themes and the whole thing, and they could be open till 11, but the CUP says it can only be open to 10. So they have no idea they're violating it. So I think that, from a thinking about like if we're trying to improve the process, that should cost nothing, right? Because I always think about what's the cost, right? I don't want to take staff time and resources for it. As new businesses, because they have to apply for a business license, right? Wouldn't it just make sense to, when someone applies for a new business license in a physical space, that we just give them the existing CUP? And then that, it's logical, right?
Yeah, we'd have to talk about the business license process because it's basically a tax that the planning staff really doesn't have a lot of involvement in the business license process.
Because it wouldn't, okay, so maybe that may not be the best place, right? But when we know that it's going to change from business A to business B, don't we have a duty to let them know the CUP of the existing space?
Sure.
So then
and
if we give it to them, then we're good, right? And I think that takes care of, that would avoid a lot of future conflict that isn't deserved, right? Because if someone is someone's serving alcohol to minors, someone's open till midnight, they're supposed to close at 8, those are going to be things that are going to be addressed pretty quickly, I would think.
Right, and I would just say real quick before Katie jumps in, so when we can, which is when we know, we do. But we don't always know either. People do stuff all the time without telling us. Just FYI.
Right, but they also may not know that's my point, is they may not know they're violating the CUP, right? Because for the most part, it has to be a certain type of business in that area, right? And I would assume that that's a process that the city reviews to make sure it fits the zoning. Because obviously stuff that comes before us is reviewed for that. I'm assuming there's a process if it's just changing. And then, so I think we owe it to the new business owner to make sure that they understand the current CUP, and then they just follow it. Most people are going to follow it if they know it. If they don't know it, they may not follow it.
Yeah, I think the problem might be, if I'm going to buy your business, I have a contract with you. If you didn't disclose it to me, the city doesn't even know that me and you have this contract that I give you money, the lawyers get involved, and I don't even know that they get involved with it. And then once I bought it from you, right? Now I've bought it. Now I go and I get my business license, and they still don't know what the heck's going on. It's kind of difficult.
Yeah, which is why, if you remember the conversation about the commercial spec building, my initial ask was actually different from where we landed, which is what I really wanted was bring back the business that you're going to be putting in there for approval
Right, yeah.
versus a commercial spec building, because in theory, was it entertainment, right? And that's a broad category. And again, because of the homes behind it, right? Because I want to make sure Brentwood stays as friendly to business as we can. But I also think if people are concerned about people violating CUPs, I haven't seen it or heard of it. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We need to make sure that the business owners understand their current CUPs.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I just don't know. I don't disagree with what you said, by the way. I'm just saying in practice, like if I'm going to buy a business from you, right? Me and you come up with a price. You send me an agreement. You don't disclose it to me. And now I got a new business and I don't even know that there was a CUP attached. And I don't know that the city knows that me and you've swapped business. And when we do come and get a business license, it's like Mr. Nolthenius said, it's a tax. And it's just like, let me pay this tax and get out of here. It's kind of craziness.
Wouldn't posting the conditions somewhere at the business, even if it's not publicly viewable, at least give a new owner a fighting chance to find them? And if they had that one requirement to post them, then they would have to be aware that they existed.
Yeah, but I suppose I don't post it.
Well, it would be a requirement. You go into a business.
Suppose I don't post it.
It's a requirement. Most people that I know will follow the law if it's a simple request. I don't know a lot of people that would just turn their backs on it if it was a requirement. I mean, unless you're wanting to sit here and tell me, as somebody who is intimate with the business community, that we have a bunch of lawbreakers doing business in our city. I don't believe that for a minute.
I just think, I don't know that that's going to work to be, I don't know if it's practical, but I think, if you ask it, I mean, they may not, but then you need an enforcement mechanism to make sure they did. And if if 3 months goes by and you're in a business and somebody rips down the sign, or it gets torn, does somebody go put it back? Unless there's an inspector to go make sure you got
That's what a frame is for. You put it in a frame.
I'm just saying to you, I don't know that that's going to be a realistic option from my experience.
Go ahead,
Sorry,
Commissioner
just
Brent.
interject. Vice Chair Sparling commented on one aspect of, let's call it a type of non-compliance, where the business owner effectively doesn't know that they are essentially in non-compliance. To Mr. Nolthenius, where are we seeing business owners out of compliance? Like, where have you seen, how do you say this? Like, are they aware and they disregard it? Are they unaware and then they become aware and then come into compliance? Or are there any other styles of non-compliance maybe that you see within planning with regards to enforcement, or does community enrichment see with enforcement?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think back again. Like currently, I'm not aware of anything that's really going on right now that's a major, even a minor concern. The one example I brought up, which was years ago, maybe 15 years ago or so, it was basically like a nightclub, and the police department was constantly responding to issues out there, and they were out of compliance. It might have been like, serving to minors or the fights, those kinds of things. So I can't really think of a lot of examples where, to be able to answer your question effectively, it's more of like a hypothetical. But yeah, it probably would be something more like operating outside the approved hours, closing later than they're supposed to.
Okay, so yeah, sorry, Katie.
I was just, in the other communities with which I've worked that we have seen failure to comply with conditional use permit conditions. Every instance I can think of has been the business operator that had the CUP issued to them, and they were just ignoring or flagrantly violating something. It wasn't the case that the business had turned over and they were unaware of a conditional use permit. And for the most part, that's because when you open a new business, part of your due diligence is learning all the laws that apply to you and, coming up to speed on things that perhaps you didn't have familiarity with before, like payroll taxes and all sorts of new things that come along with owning a business. Determining whether or not you're subject to a conditional use permit is generally one of those items. So I haven't seen a case where a new owner has been completely unaware that a conditional use permit applied to their project. Maybe they didn't know some of the conditions and so they had to come in and ask for a copy, but I haven't run into that particular situation.
Okay, and that's just to help, I think, clarify as far as the breadth of how we want to address CUP enforcement, right? It sounds like primarily it's disobedience, maybe. I don't. There's probably a better word than that. But in addition to potentially, folks that aren't completely aware of as you described.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good discussion, but I think for the large part, I think we're trying to solve a problem that really isn't as big as, from what we've heard tonight, whether it be here or whether we're most of the CUP violations are going to be people who are just not going to do the right thing. And that's a totally different issue than what I think most of this issue, if we were to suggest any changes, would make, right? And I think you made, I chuckled when you said manufacturing and quality, and you compared that to government. It's manufacturing is always going to be precise with a certain level of quality. Government is much more complicated than that. And so this is a great example of it, right? I think we're trying to, what's the saying, kill an ant with a sledgehammer, right? On this, I don't think really this is as big of an issue, whatever the saying, I don't know, you get the analogy, right? I think certainly there are certain businesses that that the staff will have to manage through that. Again, I think we can do something different when new businesses, especially around homes in an area that there are no businesses today. We can do some things within the language of the CUP to make sure that it is brought back to us for review or whoever's sitting in these chairs. I think that's things that we can do without having to create additional work for the city staff and spend resources on it, because it's something that within our control moving forward.
One thing just to consider, because there's been a lot of good discussion on this topic, the next time a use permit is brought to the commission, and Katie and I can take this back to the planners and other staff and think about, the wording of certain conditions. Maybe there's conditions that can be added. It's obviously going to come back to the commission, whatever the next one is, in draft form, right? Because what we do at staff level is prepare resolutions for the commission's consideration, and that's from the findings down to the conditions. But at least it'll be kind of a starting point. You can reflect back on the discussion tonight and tweak language as appropriate, provided it's, legally checks all the boxes. But I think we have a good idea in terms of what the commission's concerns are and how we might be able to address those moving forward.
Good. Okay. Well, I appreciate that. The conversation was.
Chair Roberts, I have a little bit more. Sorry.
Oh, okay, Commissioner.
Yeah, because I'm not ready to abandon the discussion on the grounds that some of us don't consider it important, some of us do consider it important. I do think that there's a reason why Chair Roberts brought this up. So I did want to ask just quickly in looking at this effort, how many CUPs are there in the city of Brentwood right now in force?
How many active use permits are there?
Mm-hmm.
They don't know. They don't know.
It's well over 100. I mean, it's probably in the hundreds. I don't know.
In the hundreds.
Yeah.
So it's not like intractable amount. How many of those are available digitally?
What was the question? How many what?
Are available digitally?
Okay.
You know, that you could
Yes.
access without having to go back to microfiche?
Oh, this is a total ballpark.
Sure.
Half, well, slightly more than half.
So
Because we have use permits that date to probably the 70s.
and they are still in force.
Mm-hmm.
They're
They are
still-
perpetual.
Yeah, they're in effect, correct.
And so I just think that the information of what the operational conditions are on those CUPs should be available. And it shouldn't be that hard. If it's just a few hundred records to construct a database, it just takes, one person sitting at their desk for a week, and I could do it. And I know what I'm talking about because I do stuff like this. It's my day job. So the other thing I do in my day job is I explain things to people to make them procedurally simple for them to understand things that are complex. And that's what I'm trying to do here. So when I say post-operating conditions on a sign, I'm talking about printing out a sheet of paper, sticking it in a certificate frame, and hanging it on the wall. And then everybody can just look at it and see it. And it's unambiguous. It's there for everybody to see. The public knows it. The operator knows it. Other businesses know it. You know it. Everybody knows it. And there's no question in anybody's mind what the operating conditions are for this. And I don't think it's really hard to go through even an old condition of approval. I mean, there's like maybe a couple dozen conditions of approval, even on a complex business, and say, oh, this is operational and this isn't. I mean, you have to do this before you build. That's not operational. You have to maintain these hours. That is operational. It's not complicated to figure out which ones are operational or which are not. And I just want to see the operational conditions that are currently in effect for any business should be readily available to the public and to the business owner by any means. When I suggest, making a database or hanging a sign, what I'm really telling you is that I think that it's important that everybody know what the rules are so they can follow them, and I don't see where it's a burden to the public. I don't see where it's a huge burden to the business. I see some time and effort with staff. And for that, we would have to have a motion and we would have to, make an advisory motion to City Council. But I just don't see anything wrong with letting people know what their conditions of operation are. Why should they not know? Why shouldn't it be easy? And going forward, if we do it and we just, like I said, just make the conditions of operation their own section, pull them, put them up where somebody can just grab them and print them. And they, the CUP is, what is it? It's by APPN or is it by address?
It's both.
Yeah. So it should be possible for a business to discover their CUP. It should be possible for a member of the public to discover that CUP. These are public documents. And that's really, I think, when I hear comments from the public, and you've heard them, people are flabbergasted that they can't just see what the rules are. And if they want to report something, they can report it. People don't feel burdened by having the information. They feel empowered. And this is what I'm trying to accomplish. And I know that not all the commissioners agree with me on this, but I see no problem with hanging up a sign. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 signs with 8 within my eyesight right now. It's not a big deal. Oh, 9. It's not a big deal to hang up a sign. And it would solve the problem once and for all. As far as the historical stuff, I'm patient. If it took a year, fine. I understand that going and looking at a bunch of microfiche, imaging them into a way that they could be read through OCR to get the data out of them might take, a reasonable person some amount of time. But I don't know if there's any way that you can take those microfiche and just automatically digitize them or at least photograph them digitally. But whatever the process is, I think what this is about transparency and, effective government and empowering the residents and the other business owners and the business owners themselves that are doing the operations of those businesses to understand what they have and what their requirements are. Because you know what? Despite what some of my fellow commissioners are saying, most people want to follow the law. I know I do. I want to do the right thing. And I know you do. You want to do the right thing. You're not out saying, I'm not going to do that. Most people will follow the rules most of the time. And they just need to know what the rules are. And that's the number one complaint I hear from so many people talking about government and how dissatisfied they are with government is they say, they won't even tell me what I'm supposed to do. Just tell them what they're supposed to do and they'll be happy. They'll do it. And that's all I'm asking for here. And that's all I'm asking for my fellow commissioners to entertain that idea. And with that, I'm done.
Okay,
Can I-
well, so,
Can I just say a couple things?
sure, of
And
course you may.
I can tell you right now, we tell at the planning level, we tell people what they need to do a lot, and a lot of times they don't like it. So it's not quite that simple. But what I would say to your specific request about posting operational conditions at a business, I think moving forward, we'll certainly go back and talk about it because I want to make sure that Katie's comfortable with that from a legal perspective. So if that is the case, we can certainly bring back the next one with potentially a draft condition, again, for the commission's consideration. And ultimately, whoever makes a motion and that gets seconded and voted on, that condition may either stay, it could get modified, or it could just get dropped, but we'll look into that. Sitting here right now, thinking about the work effort that would be involved in terms of going back in time, like you asked how many that was a total ballpark guess on my part. I have no idea. But I can tell you, if we were to do that, it would be a significant work effort. So I couldn't commit to something like that tonight based on everything else that we already have in the pipeline, whether it's a development project or special projects that we have. So that would concern me. And I certainly understand what you're saying. I'm also all for transparency. Staff does not try to hide anything ever from anybody. If a request is made for information, we certainly get it to them. But compiling that sort of information, especially going back 40, 50 years, that's a lot. So I'd be concerned about that. That's all.
Okay, so let me just do a wrap up real quick. I brought this up because we spend an awful amount of time on CUPs. Like I said, I've been sitting in this chair for years, and when they come up, we go into it hard, and we should. But for all the time that we spend with CUP discussions, there's got to be, it can't be vague. It can't be just a discussion without some kind of monitoring and enforcement. Why even bother if there's not going to be any follow-through? And yeah, we do have some non-compliance here in the city of Brentwood, probably on a low level, but it's not to say as we're growing, and we are growing, and we all know that here in the planning department and the planning commission, those things need to be addressed proactively. And I am not one to address things knee-jerk reactively. So that's why I brought this up. I do like this idea of putting a sign up. We have signs for fire and OSHA. And I mean, when you walk into a business, there's mandates that require organizations to have these things posted for everyone to see, exits in case of a fire. So it's not a big ask, it's not a big reach to have something posted, even to have it in a place where if somebody wanted to take a look at it, it's there, but that it's really there for the applicant, to remind the applicant that they have signed on to something that they have to adhere to. So that's not a bad ask. And that's something that I would like the planning department to take a look at with legal and see if if that's something that we can put in a business or ask a business owner, or as Commissioner Spaulding said, there's a lot of muscle we have when it comes to CUPs, because God knows we talk for hours about them when they come before us. So that is something that we could, in fact, incorporate in our ask. So I thank everyone for the conversation. It's a worthy conversation, like I said, because we spent a lot of time in the discussion of CUPs. And with that, no more discussion. I just wanted to bring it before the planning department to let them know that I would hope that you take a look at this and bring it back to the commission at some point. There's no sense of urgency, but there's something that I would like to see brought back to the commission as it relates to next steps, if it's possible. And that next step for me, as I've indicated, I know we don't have the resources, and some of our esteemed public has communicated, well, that's your job, but we know that no one's going out to the club or the restaurant that's worked a full day to check and see if they're closing on time. I mean, that's just, realistically, that's just not going to happen frequently. From an audit standpoint, sure, once in a while, but frequently I don't see it. So we do count on the public to bring it back, to make the call, to say that there's a disturbance or the music's too loud or what are we doing? But I think we lead off with having it posted in that facility, and it's not a big sign, but it's there so that it is a constant reminder that they signed on to something that they have to adhere to from a compliance standpoint. So whatever you can do about that, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, so I don't certainly don't want to miss anything that the commission is trying to convey to staff tonight, but when you talk about next steps, I want to make sure I'm clear. Is it enough to, when the next use permit comes to the commission, for the commission to know that staff will study those conditions intently based on the discussion tonight, make any suggested modifications to those that we think are appropriate, and then leave it to the commission for discussion at that particular meeting, right? The conditions will get adopted in some form, and then we'll know how to treat those moving forward?
I think.
Or is there something additional that?
No, I think we can start there, and in that discussion, because we always have discussion, we can bring up some of these ideas that we are discussing this evening. And one of those would be to, if it is approved, that approval is posted somewhere in that business. I like that idea.
That's totally doable from staff's perspective, so
Yeah.
I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, I like that idea. It's not a big ask. Like I said, we've got fire plaques and occupancy, all that's hanging in a business. So one more sign's not going to kill anybody, I don't think.
But it is a big ask going backwards. Forwards, it's easy. Backwards, it's almost an impossible
Yeah, well,
task. And I
They're
think
grandfathered in.
well, we have to, we have to actually come up with that. We
Yeah.
can't just say we're grandfathered in.
Yeah.
That doesn't,
Well, we would cross that bridge when we get to it, but I
Right.
would think that we could grandfather something like that in. Because I'm not asking us to go back
I think-
40, 50, 100 years. I'm talking about when a CUP comes forward today, that we have as in anything, a different approach.
Yeah, and one thing I was thinking of real quick, someone used the term, or maybe a couple of you used the term grandfather. I wouldn't use that term necessarily, but, and Katie might be able to speak to this better than I would, but to the extent you want to go back and look at, say, prior use permits and have them do some, they basically have a vested approval based on the conditions that were put in effect at that time. So there's really no way for the city to say, we now want you to do this, right? We can't do, now moving forward, again, we can certainly look at future use permits and how those conditions are worded and then subsequently implemented, how they're structured within the resolution, right, in terms of breaking out the prior two type conditions versus the operational conditions. So they're easier to find, right? And then anything else that the commission might be interested in doing. But I kind of personally like the idea of bringing a use permit forward. Test case might not be the best term, but as a way for the commission to see how that might look on an actual use permit. And then staff will know moving forward that that's kind of the route the commission's interested in.
It's fair enough.
Fair enough.
Okay. Oh, Commissioner Johnson.
I don't, I don't want to bring this, drag this thing out because I think we're at a good spot. I would just say that, it's particularly with the signage, it's kind of like a slippery slope. And the only thing I want to say is that I do agree that there may be an issue, but to Commissioner Sparling, maybe there's not that many issues. But I would hate to start, we put this, requirement on a business to put that up. Somebody else at the city council level says, hey, I don't like, and now there's another requirement. It's just, I think if there was a big problem, I would agree. But I think it could be a slippery slope, and that's my only comment.
Well, I get it, but I'm not waiting on big problems. I like to get in front of stuff. So that's just where I am. I mean, we all have different ways of looking at things. My way of looking at things is before it becomes a big problem, like I said, we've been sitting on this commission for some time, and we know that there's a whole lot coming our way. And before it becomes an issue, I just rather get in front of it. Plus, at the end of the day, I just don't see what the big deal is about hanging a sign with other signs that are already in the building. But then, again, we're not there yet. I think that the planning department has a great idea. When the CUP does come before us, the next one comes before us, we have the discussion. Yeah, we have the discussion then. I mean, I don't want to put the cart before the horse. I brought it up because we spent a lot of time talking about CUPs, and rightfully so. So when the next one comes before us, we can have the discussion and see how it irons out. It might be that we don't do anything, leave things just the way they are. But until then, I just wanted to hear some of the comments that were being made and park it, if that's all right with the commission. Just park it and wait and see. Okay? All right. All right, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and ask for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Who has a second?
I don't know if I was first or second, whatever it is, I'll.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, very good. And the next regular planning commission meeting is scheduled for May 21st, 7 p.m. and will be held here in council chambers. Mothers, have a wonderful Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day.
And be safe out there. Thank you.